October 5th will mark the 60th anniversary of the James Bond franchise. As an avid fan of the series, I have decided to commemorate that date by reviewing all of the films from my least favourite to my most favourite. Please be warned, these reviews will involve spoilers. Also, I will be including the 1967 James Bond spoof Casino Royale and the unofficial 1983 Bond film Never Say Never Again in my rankings. The World Is Not Enough is the 19th official James Bond film. In the film, James Bond must stop an oil heiress and an international terrorist from engineering a nuclear accident in Istanbul, Turkey. The World Is Not Enough tells the story very effectively. It features plenty of complexity whilst also being simple enough that most people can follow it. One of the best things about this film is that the audience is just as much in the dark as Bond is. We uncover different aspects of Elektra's scheme as Bond does. As a result, we are able to project ourselves into the film. A genius aspect of The World Is Not Enough is the fact that Bond himself is used as a pawn in Elektra's wider scheme. It is Bond who inadvertently delivers the bomb that kills Sir Robert King. This is similar to the way in which Spectre uses Bond as a pawn in From Russia with Love. There are certainly aspects of the film that tend towards the ridiculous. The buzzsaw helicopters are a perfect example. For the most part, however, I find that these moments are relegated to isolated moments in the film and do not detract from the overall story. The World Is Not Enough arguably features Pierce Brosnan's best performance as James Bond. This, of course, has as much to do with the film's clever screenplay as it does with Brosnan's acting. Brosnan, it must be said, is only ever as good as his scripts allow him to be. In The World Is Not Enough, Bond is ruthless and vulnerable, serious and humorous at the same time. We see Bond's ruthless side at several moments in the film. He is perfectly prepared to shoot LeChase if he does not divulge what he wants to know. He is comfortable with shooting Renard execution style, and he kills Elektra King in cold blood, though he does agonise over it afterwards. By equal measure, Bond is also vulnerable. He is not the superhero that the Roger Moore era had presented us with. Rather, he is a human being who feels pain and who makes mistakes. Bond seems genuinely hurt when it turns out that Elektra isn't all she could be. Similarly, we genuinely fear for him when he is being tortured. Even Bond's shoulder injury is a source of vulnerability. It causes him a great deal of discomfort. Making Bond vulnerable has the effect of making him more human and therefore more relatable. Another great thing about The World Is Not Enough is that Bond takes the initiative. Spurred on by his involvement in Sir Robert King's death, it is Bond who discovers the connection with Renard, though he doesn't realise its full implications, and convinces Dr. Molly Warmflash to clear him for duty. Throughout the film, Bond is prepared to disobey or circumvent orders in order to do his job. Central to The World Is Not Enough is Bond's relationship with the film's antagonist, Elektra King. Elektra uses a potent mix of sex and vulnerability to seduce Bond, who becomes so enamoured with her that he almost fails to see her machinations. Interestingly, this delves deeply into both the literary and Brosnan versions of the James Bond character. The literary James Bond has a predilection for winged dove women. Similarly, Pierce Brosnan's James Bond seems to feel a need to help vulnerable women. Elektra King is actually one of the more interesting villains in the Bond series. I like to think of her as the revenge of the Bond girls. For most of the series, Bond girls have either been disposable playthings, unwitting pawns, or sacrificial lambs. Elektra King is one of the few Bond girls to actually have a large degree of agency. Like Shakespeare's Richard III, she is, quote, determined to prove a villain, unquote. A lot of Elektra's character is revealed through her name. In his Theory of Psychoanalysis, the psychologist Carl Jung referred to the Elektra complex as a girl's psychosexual competition with her mother for possession of her father. The surname King has obvious monarchical connotations. However, it is not her father that Elektra wants to possess. Indeed, she has him killed for leaving her at the mercy of Renard, but his business empire. Throughout The World Is Not Enough, Elektra asserts that it was her mother's family that discovered the oil wells upon which Sir Robert King built his wealth, and that she is going to restore the wealth, glory, and presumably power of her mother's family. It is also suggested that Elektra is suffering from Stockholm Syndrome, a condition in which hostages develop a psychological bond with their captors. Personally, I am not inclined to believe this, though I am certainly inclined to believe that her kidnapping triggered something. Elektra clearly has a romantic relationship with Renard, but I think it is she who has power over him, and not the other way around. Speaking of Renard, I find he is much more effective when he isn't seen. Initially, Renard comes across as a very scary presence. The cigar girl is even prepared to commit suicide rather than face his wrath. Once we meet him, however, Renard quickly loses much of his menace. Dr. Christmas Jones is certainly one of the more controversial Bond girls. Although accepting Denise Richards as a nuclear scientist is asking me to stretch my suspension of disbelief a bit too far, I have no problems with seeing her in a wet t-shirt. Valentin Zukovsky returns to The World Is Not Enough. However, unlike GoldenEye, where he is at least somewhat believable as a Russian mobster, this film makes the mistake of playing him mostly for laughs. Finally, The World Is Not Enough is also notable as Desmond Llewellyn's last appearance as Q. He had appeared in all James Bond films with the exceptions of Dr. No and Live and Let Die. I find the filmmaking on The World Is Not Enough to be fairly solid. Director Michael Apted had a strong background in television soap operas before coming to Bond. As such, this film focuses more on the relationships between the characters than on the action scenes, which may go a long way in explaining why some people don't like it. Although there are certainly moments when the film becomes a bit too melodramatic, I feel that this approach suited the tone of the film. The set design in The World Is Not Enough is nice. It is grand and opulent, without being overbearing. There are some action sequences featuring some brilliant special effects and some spectacular stunts. The boat chase on the River Thames is particularly notable. The music and titles are okay. Personally, I find them neither here nor there. It is all too common to hear Bond fans dismiss The World Is Not Enough. Often this is due to the dull casting of Denise Richards as a nuclear scientist, and a few unfortunate moments of ridiculousness. However, The World Is Not Enough features a stronger story and better developed characters than many people are willing to admit. I strongly recommend that people take a look at The World Is Not Enough with fresh eyes. It might just surprise them. My favourite part of The World Is Not Enough is the opening sequence with Bond and the Swiss banker Lachaise. Brosnan is as tough as nails here. My least favourite part is Valentin Zukovsky. They turned a great character into an utter buffoon.